Welcome to the Green Ring, and thank you so much for watching. This video is 16th and last in a series of 16 which present a note-by-note analysis of Wagner's Die Walküre Act 3. Built on nearly 2 centuries of scholarly literature, this massive journey aspires to examine in its entirety Der Ring des Nibelungen to its final note. I hope you'll take this gigantic voyage with me, which I'm working night and day to complete. Before diving into this video, you may want to watch the case for Erda, the case against Wotan, and the case for Loge, which present my views on how and why Wagner manipulates his musical syntax the way he does, and in the process identifying key morphemes which I believe define the entire work. You'll find explanations for why the terms leitmotif, motif, and motive have been replaced by morpheme, module, and cell in the chapter titled Music as Text. Links are provided in the comments below, along with those for videos initiating Das Rheingold and Die Walküre Act 1 and 2. As always, thanks for watching, and please do leave your comments below. They are so important to YouTube's algorithm, a crucial element in keeping this one-of-a-kind effort afloat. But even more, I'm anxious to hear what you think of so unusual a project. Agree or disagree, my top priority is responding to your insights. We pick up as Wotan rouses himself from the sadness of his farewell to summon Loge's fires, page 678 top stave in Dover's full score. With all prepared, Wotan pulls himself together for his last deed as announced by a unique module. This seems entirely non-syntactic, mere filler, some gravitas for Wotan's center stage walk as requested by score instructions. However, it echoes with intent the Walküre's recent plea that her father should destroy her with his spear, rather than deny her requests for protective terrors, itself reverberating her Walküre sister's outrage at the idea of disobeying their father. To grasp the syntactic weight of what appears mere chaotic filigree to underline Brunhilde's passion requires detailed unpacking. A swift first violin melody note flourish initiates its primarily string-driven syntax. Seconds and violas bookend her extended retrograde melody notes with variants on the quasi-annunciation lifts which rifles shielding's definitive appearance. Inspired by the Walküre's melody notes, as doubled in first violin's cellos, second's violas shift into 3 progressive lifts on that module alone. The first, in the crotchet rest separating first violin cello doubling, elides their duo of surprisingly familiar modules, God turn mixed with anti-barrier, second violin's violas completing a second interpolated God turn. The pace quickens with the next measure to include a pair of first violin cello anti-barriers, Brunhilde's vocal doubling the last, as second violin's violas launch 2 God turns, finished by first violin's cellos whose 3-note caps distort fate. Wotan's silent determination crystallizes this earlier complex into 2 closely similar pulses of its syntax. The first, a fifth below the second, consist of Erda melody notes followed by a quasi-fate iteration. Their juxtaposition also creates anti-barriers and God turns, intervening rests breaking the spines of both modules, the second pair further maimed by intervening third drop. This evolution of pre-existing syntax, its only iteration, isn't a recurring morpheme, yet its syntax concisely portrays Wotan drawing himself up to summon the fire god's flames, thus forever separate Brunhilde from the gods, while placing her entirely in Erda's hands. It also confounds the fallacy that Wagner's syntactic method relies solely on his large constructions, traditionally called leitmotifs. The present analysis dubs these forms morphemes, briefer elements with individual syntactic meaning from which he constructs them, termed modules, God turns, anti-barriers, ring lust, cells being their smallest units, octaves, air to chords, ash intervals. Wotan thus prepared, massed trombones boom forth the spear in its most usual form to announce Warfather's Loge invocation, a sequence lacking only a single fire god module, meaning its ascending retrograde chord notes. The first time since Rheingold this abundance crowds together in such close proximity, the others precisely ordered to mirror what stage instructions describe. The chord note tremolo launches it, buzzing demi-semi-quaver across 6 measures, harmony unchanged. Violas atop first cellos, their seconds a third below. Doubling strings, trombones, twice bellow fanfare-like retrograde air to chords, bassoons softly answering with the chords themselves, together evoking the Tarnhelm's magic, Loge at work for Erda. Atop bassoon pulses, Wotan's initial 2 commands plunge fifths to rise octaves, meaning ringless distortions. With the next 4 measures, bassoons overlap retrograde air to chords with trombones air to chords proper. The Immortal's orders expanded by a reminder he once banned the fire sprite. It's a chunk of backstory one wishes Wagner had shared, even if the Norns do take an oblique stab at it. The Immortal lifts the fourth during a low ash interval into melody and chord notes to produce Annunciation's partial god turn, which after quaver rest he follows by rising a 6th from the 5th below into its retrograde melody notes and capping 3rd drop. Harmony lifted a whole tone, he ceremoniously repeats this phrase, his mind firmly set on achieving his racial goal in spite of, or possibly because, of the Earth Mother's resistance. Clinching the matter, Wotan concludes the second phrase with a heroic rising 5th, an anti-barrier, as Viola's cellos round their last finger tremolo minim to surge up Loge's bassoon doubled chromatic scale, the god lifting a 6th to another low ash interval. With his downbeat D natural minim quaver, trombones, tuba, boom another if briefer spear pulse, as Warfather resumes atop its crotchets, his retrograde ash intervals, chord notes through up-down beat, launching a single horn woodwind iteration of the fire sprite's air to chord module. With its first measure, second violins trade a pair of his flickering modules with Viola's flippant harmonized lifts, the flicker twice repeated in the next measure over pizzicato Viola's harmonized natural sine, clarinets on second-third beat tracing that demi-semi-quaver arpeggio lift into retrograde chord notes, from Brunhilde's appeal for Loge's fires. It moves second violins to sync across the measure's remainder through a distortion of the fire god's descending module, tapped by 2 horn woodwind staccato crotchet chords as they conclude this first Loge air to chord iteration. Wotan lifts an octave through up-down beat, which after a quaver rest, his Welsung joy pulse, a whole tone above, complete with Welsung triad, finishes in a plunging octave, a tight syntactic image of the god's program to convert nature's energy to his own anti-natural aims through his Welsung progeny. Second violins confirm its sexual thrust with the trilla partitura to skitter down Loge's chord note module with clarinet viola quaver chord doubling. This fire bundle repeats a third below, trombones adding weight to its Loge air to chords, cellos taking second violins modules, violas taking cellos, Wotan rising a third across the second measure's up-down beat, twice intoning the Welsung's retrograde melody notes, whose second pulse he caps with retrograde air to chord notes to produce a truncated giant turn, as if to invoke Loge's protection against the kind of unacceptable racial types which once menaced Sigmund and Welsa. On the next downbeat, first cello's trilla partitura launches 2 measures skittering down Loge's chord note module with clarinet horn bassoon and pizzicato second cello contrabass harmonized quaver doubling. This sets the stage for the Great Fire reveal. Stage directions calling for Wotan to strike the butt of his spear against a rock. His 3 strokes on the next 3 measures downbeats precisely notated in score. A divisi cello bass clarinet Loge tremolo fills the initial pair as trombones bassoons growl retrograde erde chords against Wotan's 2 cries of Loge on descending erde fourths to encapsulate the tussle between God and Vala over this fateful deed. Directors, as often as not, ignore these spear strikes, for what reasons they alone know, a handful adding some marginally gratifying stage effects with each strike. The god lifts that fourth across the next up-down beat, key subtly changed to E as woodwind's cellos lift through Loge's chromatic scale, while trombones growl a last semi-breve chord, passing it to horns with their quaver lift on the next downbeat as woodwinds fall out. Violas take their place in the scalar ascent, horns capping their own semi-breve chord with a similar quaver lift on the next downbeat, where violas, cellos pass through a pair of tense anticipatory measures, their tremolo lifted a half tone in the second. On the next downbeat, an apparently new morphine, often called magic fire, sparkles forth, like flames pouring from that spot Wotan has only just struck, another direction from the score which directors rarely follow. At its core, this is of course Loge's erde chord module, reinforced in horns woodwinds, though its piccolo harp filigree feels like something quite new, despite molded from well-familiar syntax. Welsung triads dominate, the initial pair with rising octaves followed by effectively plunging ones, similar to the Walküre cry, then heroic melody notes. Its second measure varies this mixture, its triad followed by the falling octave expanded to a ninth, then a quintuplet natural sign flip in flutes, cellos ended in retrograde melody notes, as coined in Brunhilde's earlier plea. The syntax goes on to ratify the morpheme's 1-5-1 cadence, more broadly traced by horns woodwinds to conclude on a giant-like rising arpeggio, its abandonment triad emphasized. Tangentially, but consistent with the passage's syntactic message, the cadence moves through horns woodwinds as erde chords, a double impact and the chord's reversal. From this point to opera's end, and with only a few brief variants, first violins oppose broad demi-semi-quaver unnatural sine waves harmonized across their 2 chairs against flatter natural sines in seconds, whose second chair versions are nearly fingered tremolos. The next measure repeats the first bar, but varies the second as that quasi-shielding terrors module Wotan introduces while expanding on his daughter's suggestion of Loge's flames. Violas added to its horn woodwind chords, whose descending scale amounts to extended retrograde melody notes. The entire bundle repeats, raised a whole tone, after which the Wotan bass variant sounds a last time. The keys shifted again, this time to A-flat, violas doubling horns woodwinds in their entirety. Taken together, these 10 bars encapsulate the new direction Wotan's racial agenda now takes. This enchanted blaze, the last puzzle piece to ensure his breeding strategy triumphs, while unbeknownst to him, Loge and Erda work in tandem to remake that plan according to their own design. The next 2 measures raise Loge's taunting module to climax, his needling for both Alberich and the gods. The module twice alternates with its original chromatic descent, as all harps double the stationary taunts, leaving only 3 with the falling module, woodwind quavers doubling the erde chords as horns creep in progressively. Since the launch of Magic Fire, a glockenspiel has tapped only the downbeat of each measure and a few interior beats. With these 2 measures, it traces the morpheme's quaver erde chords, while triangle pings Valhalla ash intervals on the measure's first 3 beats, 2 quaver strikes on their last. It's a gleaming build-up to a vast magic sleep restatement, key return to E major, a sweeping four-measure descent suggestive of Loge's fires as they cascade down over Brunhilde's rock, nature's powers subsuming those even of the god himself, the Walküre buried ever more deeply in her mother's dreaming womb. Horn woodwind crotchets fall out severally as they follow the harp-violin chromatic sign descent, harps attenuated with the last measure, viola-cello crotchets added to the final two. It resolves into four placid shielding terrors pulses, one per measure, second flute, English horn, first clarinet, alternating with first flute, first oboe, English horn, as a third trumpet Valhalla ash interval punches the first measure's second beat. The Vala dominates this benign lullaby, Loge's inviting flames, gentle pulses, violins demi-semiquaver signs altered to one per measure, harp severely trading semiquaver sign fragments, each terror's pulse underpinned by horn woodwind air chord strophes, in their warm Rhine maiden guise. Shielding terrors is a positive natural sign, most recent evolution of the spear's unflagging descent, mark of the immortal's change of heart, so there may be cause for hope. Warfather must have the last word, however, as he decrees, Wer meine Speere Spitze fürchtet, durchschreite das Feuer nie. Partially following 5th through 8 horn bass trumpets' complete noble Siegfried iteration, his ascent into its initial 4th through a low ash interval, followed by a precise echo of its low interval's 3rd lift, only to omit both its anti-barriers, the first with a 3rd descent to follow his quaver rest, with a 6th plunge from the 4th above, then rest-dotted crotchet to rejoin the syntax on the last anti-barrier's up-down beat with a heroic rising 5th. He then completes his line with a final low ash interval on retrograde chord notes, aligned with its chord melody note finish, here with sinking interval flattened to make it the truncated Annunciation giant turn variant, which plays so important a role in his dialogue with Brunhilde, with its mark of Fasold's love for Freya, as well as Sigmund's for Sieglinde. To my mind, the Meister's technique is pellucidly clear. He crafts the god's vocal to give Brass's anti-barriers stronger voice than his own, abbreviating the first with his sword inspiration's 3rd bounce, later echoed by Sigmund in calling for that weapon, in effect ceding its power to his unborn grandson. He then drops out of the 2nd pulse in all but its rising heroic 5th. Taken together, these subtle disparities between vocal and orchestra imply Wotan believes Siegfried's anti-barrier, from which he imagines he's now strategically disassociated, will defeat his giant Nibelung foes, not imagining this new scheme might rebound against him. This is the god's last word until Siegfried, Act 1's Wanderer, which booming mass trumpet trombones, contrabass tuba ratify with a 2nd noble Siegfried iteration, identical to, yet still more shattering than the first. While it leaves no doubt who will cross this wall of terrors, it also further implants the anti-barrier in an audience's mind. Admittedly, the Meister seems to have failed in this. After a century and a half, this analysis is the first to recognize that module or its significance, an interpretation moreover likely to be met with dissent. Abate, a post-leitmotif commentator, finds this moment one of her justifications for contesting morphemic syntax as a genuine narrative tool, who feels it opens a window onto more complex issues of time dislocation. A thorough discussion of her position belongs elsewhere, but her rationale begs a word. The moment is sometimes seen as banal, silly, the point painfully obvious. It is Siegfried who will come to awaken Brunhilde. The orchestra, to paraphrase Joseph Kerman on Tosca, has screamed the first thing that comes into its head. Treadwell goes further. Is this not quintessentially a motif of anticipation? Well, no. Its allusion to the unborn hero is precisely that. A recollection of the moment earlier in the act when Brünnhilde first sings the melody, as she gives Sieglinde the name of her son to be. It predicts Siegfried's eventual achievement of his bride, but only by referring back to the moment in the score when it receives its clear indication with him. This is perhaps to belabor an obvious fact. We can't remember anything we haven't yet heard. But it is crucial to see that the musical nature of leitmotif depends entirely on its turn to the past. If at this juncture the morpheme's only purpose is to remind audiences of the one destined to cross the fire, then Abate and Treadwell are correct. However, this ideal case for grasping Wagner's syntactic method rehabilitates it against a long tradition which distorts it into what it is not by claiming it's less than what it purports to be. Treadwell is correct about the first time noble Siegfried recurs as Brünnhilde mentions the unborn child to Wotan. There it merely reinforces its association with Siegfried in the way of our child writing horse beneath her picture to strengthen her link between its sight and its sound. With all due respect to a host of brilliant minds already well familiar with the epic story, the Meister knew his audiences wouldn't be. As the action progresses, the morpheme's almost ritualistic appearances imply an as yet unformed future, while other morphemes develop around the young Welsung, which both outnumber and contradict noble Siegfried's apparent import here in Walküre, a paradox only the drama as a whole can resolve. It represents a cult of the unborn Welsung to which Brünnhilde, Wotan, and the absent Sieglinde belong. Its alluring presentiment tied to the anti-barrier's sense of heroic resistance, with its potential rescue of all that's good against all that's bad. Few miss its epic crash's potent emotional stirrings, or fail to speculate on what that portends, a presentiment in its truest sense. Only two major syntactic landmarks remain in this finale, the first immediately on the heels of noble Siegfried, as violins cellos unite in a broad farewell restatement, Wotan and Erda grieving parents who lament their child's fate, each for their own quite different reasons, as if the god stares down at the beloved now forever lost to him, the Vala's dreaming shade numinous at his shoulder. During this reprise, the orchestration alters subtly, harp-violin choirs alternating their glistening figures from chair to chair, horns low brass trading sostenuto chords while woodwinds continue passing shielding terrors iterations back and forth, violins eased into tremolo doubling of that morpheme with Farewell's last two measures. Farewell's monumental shadow dissolves on the next downbeat as violins across all chairs resume glittering demi-semi-quaver signs. Harp sign fragments pass between chairs, horns bassoons rocking on Erda chords. With this measure, first flute semi-quavers again intertwine shielding terrors. Their sparkle passed back and forth to seconds across 7 measures as woodwinds move from high register to low. Cellos return to this descent on its third iteration, bass clarinet horns the fourth. A pulse cellos cede to violas only to supplant their next strophe an octave below. Glockenspiel quaver taps add a gleam to each of the syntax's initial chord note pulses, while, more subtly during this long day crescendo, the shielding morpheme always concludes on that cell suggestive of the gods withering away with age. The one exception is its 7th pulse, which bass clarinet horns take alone, its tail a Welsung triad, finished in 7th lift to form Welsung joy as it leads to the work's last major syntactic landmark. Somber with mystery, low brass rumble 2 fate strophes, the last note of each tapped by timpani's briefest of Valhalla ash intervals, both fate iterations without shielding terrors, clear indication the Earth Mother is now in control of her daughter's future. Between these two measures, bass clarinet horns inject a shielding pulse with Welsung triad finish, Erda working to ameliorate this racial scheme in ways only she understands. Cook has a different view. Fate is suspended, as it were, while Brunhilde sleeps, and so the fate morpheme, in spite of its repetitions, is held fixed in the key in which the opera ends. He goes on to explain that, when the Walküre awakens in Siegfried Act 3, fate shakes off this harmonic suspension to indicate it is again at work. This is definitive evidence the morpheme applies to Brunhilde alone, since it's undeniable that several important events occur while she sleeps. Siegfried is born, reforges Nothung, slays Fafnir and Mima, destroys Wotan's spear, and crosses the fire to awaken her. The fate morpheme applies specifically to the Walküre's destiny, as guided by Erda and tangentially those in the Walküre's orbit. Tradition has it that Wotan ceases to take a hand in worldly events after Walküre, but this is far from the case. His confrontations with Mima, Albrecht, Fafnir, Erda, and finally his grandson leave no doubt of that. Rather, from the moment his daughter awakes, she and through her Erda eclipse his influence despite his active struggle to maintain it. The opera spins out through 7 additional measures, glockenspiel quavers tapping each measure's second and third beats, low string quaver chord, and timpani short Valhalla ash intervals pulsing with every other downbeat of the first 5, horns woodwinds holding a breve semi-breve chord. It's a sort of benediction, which on its face consists of no more than 6 shielding terror's strophes, etched alone by harp piccolo glitter, frozen in E major. Viola's natural demi-semi-quaver signs, 4 to the measure, join violin's uninterrupted measure-long pulses. Brass add a last syntactic punch as they rise across each up-down beat through a consecutive pair of high ash intervals, the first on a third, the last joined by horns woodwinds on an Erda fourth. All choirs lacking strings join in a penultimate downbeat semi-breve chord. 2 harp arpeggios rise through it, their echo of the prior intervals passed from 4th through 6th chairs to 1 through 3rd, tapped by a single glockenspiel quaver, violin's 4 unnatural signs lifting with harps against viola's unwavering natural signs. Strings evaporate with the final measure's downbeat quaver, to leave only a massed brass woodwind semi-breve chord spun out through a fermata. This seems no more than a luminously well-ordered close, yet its final high ash interval is the ring's key presentiment. By abandoning Brunhilde, the god delivers her entirely into her mother's care. Those years mature Wotan's plans, as protected by Loge from the mortal threat flourishing below. The god's pledge to Erda sleeps in the Earth Mother's arms, who has her own designs. Their daughter awakens changed, but no commentary has explored the nature of that change. Wagner tells Röckel, "From the moment Siegfried awakens her, Brunhilde has no longer any knowledge save that of love." The Meister leaves her amnesia for audiences to determine. Erda's role at last decodes in full the epic's last chapter. As house lights go up, Gribel's doubter stretches his aching legs. "We done yet?" This is not quite the halfway point, since Rheingold is considerably shorter than Götterdämmerung. Inexpressible thanks to those who've made it this far. Siegfried Act 1 will premiere as soon as possible, page 1 in Dover's full score. I'll post interim videos until those episodes are complete. I hope you'll stay with this massive undertaking. Your subscription to this channel by itself is a huge assist in completing this vast project, and a contribution, however small, to my Patreon account would be a huge help. Hit the bell to be notified of videos as they're published. With luck and your support, there's a lot more to come.